The nature of a natural deity. A broad-minded approach is presently needed for looking at some of the most common topics from a new and contemporary angle. And it is this that is required to examine old beliefs and dogmatic religious ideas in the present and changed conditions. If God were to be incarcerated in a cage, he would at best be able to pace up and down like a lion in the zoo. This is exactly the state most fundamentalist thought have accomplished. They have created an anthropomorphic deity and given it the attributes they could think of for him themselves. Their God loves because they can feel love. Their God gets angry too. This again is so because they themselves know of anger. Their God is benevolent and merciful because this is what they wish him to be. Then their God also forgives. This again is so because they know that it is human nature to falter and learn from mistakes. And if there is no forgiveness, there will not be a second chance to try again. Yet again, their God even punishes. This attribute is needed to be given to God to keep the wavering humanity in line and on the desired path. The concept of reward and punishment is essential and gives the effect of a carrot and a stick, all in keeping with human nature. So each succeeding religious idea adjusted its concept of God and modified his image as according to what was felt fit or necessary to suit the circumstance. The polytheists started with each attribute being represented by a separate deity. Over the ages, this showed shortcomings and an amalgamation took place and monotheism was reborn. Here, all attributes were combined to say that God is omnipotent, omnipresent, all-seeing and all-knowing. He is also described as the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover, the completely unneedful, and finally, the immanently indispensable. Each of these definitions would hold some truth, as each statement is associated with people of enlightenment, wisdom, and universal standing. Examining the last one, the immanently indispensable, seems to bring one closest to the universal nature of the omnipotent eternal being. Immanently indispensable in simple terms means the inherent necessity, the innate essence without which a thing cannot exist. There are two ways of controlling or governing a thing, either from the outside or from within. Whereas exterior control would need accessories or additional tools to exert the power, internal control, on the other hand, would require the presence of the controller within the system itself. Being within the system and part of it, the controller would not only know its conditions firsthand, he or she could also take immediate corrective measures. However, in the method of internal control, the controller would itself be affected by the change and would also have to follow the laws that govern the entire system. But in the externally controlled method, the controller is above and beyond the principles which apply to the system and may not be affected by the change taking place in or on the system. We shall now try to examine and see if the deity we are studying is an external controller as per the commonly understood and propagated religious pronouncements, or is in fact an internal part of the creation itself. Were it to be an external manipulator, it would not be affected by the doings and actions of the created entity. Well, what then is the reason and need for the creation itself? Is it just to sit and observe the unfurling of the scenario from a distance and enjoy the ups and downs of the constituents and manipulate them at whim? If so, then for what purpose? This, in some ways, is a rather rudimentary and meaningless approach, for if an act is performed without a reason or motive, it is an exercise in futility. Hence, everything connected with creation and creativity would lose all meaning, and God would assume the role of a puppeteer. Now, as any activity is not without a purpose, why then would the Creator act outside the line of meaning and reason? This mode of reasoning may seem very human and anthropomorphic in itself. Yet, is it possible for humans to have and share ideas besides the human way of expressing and sharing them? Having raised so many questions, let us try and find some answers. It is said that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Were there no beholder, there would be no beauty, and were there no beauty, no beholder would be needed. The one is the essence of the other. If the beholder were to shut his eyes, would beauty cease to exist? According to one school of philosophy, it would. Yet, it would perhaps exist, but both the beauty and the beholder would be unconscious or unaware of each other, and thus be unaffected by each. Only awareness gives meanings to things. The effect of a thing makes its presence felt, and the presence of a thing gives it the effect. It takes two to tango. The Creator would be nothing without the created, and the creation would have been meaningless if it did not impart any effect or influence on the Creator itself. A simple statement can have profound significance. For instance, any and everything anybody does so for their self. It sounds quite selfish, but seen in a non-material sense, it gives an axiomatic connotation. The self cannot be separated from the itself, however much one tries. The sadhu, Sufi, saint may all be able to detach their selves from themselves, but they remain attached to an overself, which is nothing but another dimension of self. Once again, a deed may be completely unselfish, yet its very performance leads some or other form of effect or influence on either of the selves. Ghalib, the famous poet-philosopher of India in the 19th century, has described this so aptly in context of piety when he says, "Kya zuhud ko manu कि न हो गर्चे रियाई पादाश अमल की तमा खाम बहुत है." Why piety should I acclaim? It may well have no worldly show. To gain is the aim of every act, however pious it be though. Having thus established a premise that behind every motive there is a motive, what then is the motive of the one who has created all motives? The answer to the question would lie in the fact that there has got to be a reason for the entire hullabaloo of creation and creativity. This raises the next question, that of purpose. Now this is more profound, and each individual will approach it differently and examine the idea from his or her own frame of reference. The approach here is that if purpose is the essential element in the argument, then purpose is what should be sought. Before answering this, it will be essential to establish what could be the needs of one who has everything and who is in complete control of all. As done earlier, we have to borrow a line from religion to pursue this course. Remember, we are told that man is made in the image of God. So if we were to study the nature of man, it should give some inkling to the nature of the deity itself. For such a being to do what it does, it would have to be self-generated and hence self-centered. We draw this inference by reflecting on the actions of people who are in a relatively comfortable and a comparatively self-contained category in the world, and see what motivates them to action. For instance, what would be the motivation of leaders, sages, philosophers, and the like? Power and the desire for it may motivate leaders. Tranquility and the quest of peace may be the search of the sage. And love of knowledge and the quest for truth may work for the philosophers. Each and every one, however, has to spend time and energy, or in other words, consume oneself in the pursuit of the desire. The act of self-consummation is the only way that may lead to achievement, for to get a reaction there has to be some action first. The feeling of achievement of a constructive act is known as fulfillment of self. If one has got the means and power to do things, the main motivation would be to try and test the limit of one's ability and improve them. Now, where the ability itself is limitless, the quest would be to seek awareness of the process and the reason for this ability. The deity, therefore, having all else in the bag, is seeking to become aware of itself, to see how and why it does what it does. For when it says be, a thing becomes. Al-Quran 36:82. The instant the deity gets the thought as to how and why a thing becomes what it wishes it to be, that is the moment the deity begins to question its own inherent nature of creation and its own creativity. It takes a step forward from being an unconscious creator to one who wants to be conscious and aware of its own self. Or an unfulfilled deity starts to seek self-fulfillment. Or to say that the deity, which has the power to issue a command and get instant gratification, would seek to get awareness of its own inherent qualities of creativity. In other words, an unconscious deity, capable of doing what it wishes to do, is seeking to become a consciously conscious being, studying the cause and effect of its own acts, for only then will it accomplish self-fulfillment. This it will do by going through the entire process of re-becoming itself. In other words, to recognize its own self and thereby fulfill its own purpose, much like the activity that all humanity is engaged in, that is, seeking the reason of their own being and the purpose of their lives. By reenacting the play, the deity is going to gain full awareness of its own actions and in the process the reason for them. To do this, it will have to replicate itself from scratch and become aware of the process of becoming everything starting from nothing. It seems to start with the Big Bang, goes through the phase of expansion, condensation, reformation, compression, and subsequent evolution modes to eventually reach the big crunch, perhaps, using terms of astrophysics. This self-reformation of self is the building of a system by the natural deity whereby the whole process may be reenacted on its own under its self-sufficient and self-subservient laws. And this gives an interesting foundation upon which the whole idea of this essay is based. All three monotheistic religions subscribe to the idea that the cosmos manifested in stages or days, 6 to be exact. Note that cosmos, as opposed to cosmos, according to Hellenistic theory, is the cumulative outcome of all creation. It encompasses all matter, energy, psychology, and their interplay in the entire creativity. Again, let us borrow some lines from religion to see how it all started. It is God who created the heavens and the earth and all that lies between them in 6 spans, then assumed all authority. You have no protector other than Him, nor any intercessor. Will you not be warned even then? Al-Quran 32:4. And surely your Lord is God who created the heavens and the earth in 6 spans of time, then assumed all power. He covers up the day with night which comes chasing it fast, and the sun and the moon and the stars are subject to His command. It is His to create and enjoin. Blessed be God, the Lord of all the worlds. Al-Quran 7:54. The concept of spans of time seems superior to days as given by some religious accounts. This is so because the mention of days usually restricts one's thoughts to the common conception of a day, which is 24 hours. Spans, on the other hand, brings to mind a period of time not limited to 24 hours, as some phenomena must surely have taken a relatively longer period than others to accomplish and sustain. The narration of the Quran certainly seems more profound and evolved, and shows a greater depth and maturity of intellect. Further, assumed all power is once again an indication of a more developed concept than on the 7th day God rested. For surely the deity is no earthling to be in need of rest due to depletion of energy after the hard labor or the likes of it. The 6 spans or 6 days, as in the Torah and Bible, refer to the 6 phases or stages through which creation and its development took place. It changed, matured, or evolved till it finally reached man. From there on, it takes up the mode or capability of self-development and eventual self-replication, and then the ability to re-merge into the source. Note that man is learning or becoming conscious of himself by the same progression of self-replication as nature. These 6 stages could be nature's own mechanism of transformation from ex nihilo, nothingness, or zero, to everythingness or infinity, and thus getting a close awareness of the emergence of a self-perpetuating system, which the nature itself is. These 6 spans or stages may well be: first, the stage of ex nihilo, nothingness, zero, unawareness, oblivious contentedness. This is the stage when the deity is unexposed, self-contained or dormant, not that it lacked anything or was short of completion, but that it did not fathom its own power and had yet not become conscious of its own capability and was thus unfulfilled. Second, the stage of pure idea or pure thought, a subconscious state in which nature is in its basic pure condition of thought and is as yet stationary, static, not yet dynamic. Third, the phase of conversion of pure energy or idea into matter as per E is equal to mc square. The coming forth of the cosmos, the material universe, the earth, and all non-living matter. Fourth, the stage of the interaction of dynamic energy with matter, the origination of the cellular process and the emergence of living things, vegetation and sedentary life, say the matter-energy conglomerate. 5. The stage or progress of evolution, the incorporation of mobility, the development of animal life, the final stage of which is man. 6. The development of the human mind with the incorporation of the psychological processes in the animal brain, the human journey through the various phases of development by trial and error, the conquering of ignorance by knowledge and awareness, attaining self-advancement unto the achievement of the stage of re-merger. This is the level when the matter-energy conglomerate would acquire the capability to convert back to pure energy and then to pure form or pure thought. This is thus the stage of re-attainment of the original form, the position when the deity has become aware of itself through knowledge acquired by humans, the instrument created by it for that specific purpose. Man is thus the final vehicle in nature's process of acquiring self-awareness and thus self-fulfillment through regeneration by self-replication. 7th, the day or the stage or phase when re-merger occurs. This is when nothingness becomes everythingness and everything becomes nothing. The deity achieves full awareness of itself. The parts become the whole. The stage when zero attains infinity, or zero is equal to infinity. Notice that infinity is nothing but two zeros conjoined together, or when one zero fuses with another, it becomes infinity. Infinity is nothing when one nothingness is interwoven with another nothingness. And finally, surely we are from God, and to Him we shall return. Al-Quran 2:156. To fulfill this religious prophecy, the zero man must move forward and merge with another zero God to complete the cyclical zeros of infinity. For without God, man is nothing, and without man, God is dormant or unaware of itself. Both are the essentials in the equation of awareness of meaningful existence. Once again, let us take a pointer from Ghalib and see how he saw a similar concept in his own unique way. For he says, "न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ न होता तो खुदा होता, डुबोया मुझको होने ने, न होता मैं तो क्या होता." When naught existed, God existed. Had none there been, God would be. My own existence lowered me. Would I not be, what would it be? However, I question this line of reasoning, and if and when I meet Ghalib, I will ask him why he did not write thus. न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ न होता तो खुदा होता, सुझाया मुझको होने ने, न होता मैं तो क्या होता. When naught existed, God existed. Had none there been, God would be. My very being this made me see. Would I not be, what would it be? For if I had not been brought forth, I would no doubt have been part of the whole, but an insensitive, unconscious, ignorant part. My very being and individual existence gives me an identity of an entity and is responsible for making me aware of that fact. The next thing to look at is how the natural deity harnesses its own nature. Were the natural deity to be an uncontrolled force or energy, it would not accomplish anything but destruction. This is not likely, for if it were so, then why the elaborate process of creation and the apparent systematic evolution of it? For to do any worthwhile thing, an act has to be thought out, planned, and then executed, keeping the three, thought, plan, and action, in harmony and balanced along the way. Nature itself demonstrates and achieves this by exercising self-subservience and maintaining its own self-control through self-discipline. Having the idea and laying down a plan of action, it executes it by taking itself along the route of self-nurture, obeying its own laid-down rules and regulations along the way. Self-restraint is implemented by self-sacrifice, that is, voluntarily surrendering and placing its own self subservient to its own laid-down principles. Were it not to do this and somehow act outside of those laws, it would negate its own supreme sublimity and purity, and then it would be adopting shortcuts in its own proposed goal of true self-education and subsequent self-fulfillment. It would then not be able to establish a method or system to facilitate and promote its creation to achieve the level of self-regeneration, which humans seem to be geared to. Also, going the easy way would refute the claim that truth is the basis of all natural laws and must prevail in the end. It just goes to show that truth is really honesty with oneself, as nature itself demonstrates. This fact may be further understood by examining the real nature of truth as seen through human perspective. Self-understanding, self-analyzing, and then believing and accepting one's beliefs is really what truth is. When one questions, deciphers, then understands and accepts the reasoning and logic of one's own explanations of facts and data, it becomes one's truth. As each one is unique and an individual, hence each one has a unique way of understanding and accepting an idea, and therefore each one has his or her own truths. Everyone's truth is thus relative to another's. Absolute truth is beyond the domain of this world and may only exist in another paradigm. Let us view this in another way. Nature, which is capable of everything, does imply self-restraint even in situations where it is well within its power to effect change instantaneously. It does not interfere in the working of its own system and its laws, and lets the process take its due course to bring about the desired change. It lets the cycle of things be completed in their own natural period of incubation. For example, it is well within nature's ability to annihilate and destroy a person who, say, is blasphemous and openly curses God and flouts his laws. were nature to be the anthropomorphic god of the religious thought, there would surely be a show of anger with an immediate reprimand or annihilation of the sacrilegious being. But no, the natural deity lets events take their course and treats the offense according to the laws of cause and effect. The defender's perverted thinking and unbridled free will either makes him or her repent, and this repentance then becomes the penance and subsequent cure for curing wrong thoughts. Or otherwise, the course of action of the offender takes him or her along a path of doings that are naturally detrimental to progress or success, and he and she meets his or her own natural doom, maybe by openly hurting a believer's feelings and getting beaten up in return. The resultant effect of the cause may or may not be discernible in the span of one's material life. Yet its repercussions are carried forward and borne by that part of human existence which survives into the future, which may well be what we call soul or the reincarnation of it. Now this would make logical sense only if existence is seen as extending beyond the usually visible span of birth, life and death. There must surely be existence before birth and so also after the occurrence of physical death. Because most natural phenomena are continuous and connected, so why not life? Look at it another way, and that is that a human being is nothing but an infinitesimal extension of nature itself, which is surely continuous and goes from the past through the present and into the future. Physical life is perhaps that portion of being which we can discern by our limited sensory perception, a tool mainly given to us for this phase of life. Each individual that passes on to the next phase of existence takes along some experience, exposure and awareness of the life he/she has lived, and leaving behind some effect on the material world we live. The sum total of every individual's past experience, exposures and awareness add up into the store of nature itself and enriches its own data bank, so to say, and gives to it the cumulative meaning of all perceptions and actions in the cosmos. Nature thus takes a giant leap forward with each single step of mankind. As said elsewhere in the other essay, Ultimate Human Reach, while it is humanly impossible to tame all the information of a given moment and manipulate it to affect destiny, it may be possible by some divine entity to do so, and again only by that divinity which is immanently indispensable and is the inherent necessity of all things and everything, because it is individually affected by the doings of all of humanity separately as well as collectively, and is itself affecting every one of its creation in its turn. It is fully aware, conscious and knowledgeable of all happenings all the time. This is how a natural deity would shape human destiny and thus also its own. The absolute creator seems to have created the entire system to know all happenings and even its own nature. It must have done this with full consciousness and awareness, for it also knows the method by which the system itself will unfold. That is the route it, the deity, will have to take to understand even its own self. In other words, the Creator itself knows and understands its own natural desire to know itself and completely understands its own nature inside out. it also knows the way it will have to take to fulfill its own purpose and thus achieve self-fulfillment. That is, it must recreate its own self to fully understand its own nature. Now, once it does that, then it will get to fathom why it is in the nature of nature to create, and since it is its own nature to create, it sets about creating a system to create itself by replication. The entire process of evolution is but a means to replicate itself. And as seen before, evolution is a continuous process of change. Change being the basis of and necessity of life. It is a perpetual cycle of self-improvement through evolution. Thus, everything, even nature itself, is in a process of constant evolution. It is the basis of all Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum of the natural deity. Were it not to know the means and method of re-becoming itself, it would negate the hypothesis of the belief that it is all-knowing and all-powerful. It, in other words, knows that the only way to self-discovery is by self-knowledge, which is gained by re-becoming itself, and for which it has to start from the scratch or nothingness and then go upwards and achieve everythingness. This theory gets precedence from the idea developed in another essay, Ultimate Human Reach. Now, for a complete discovery of itself, the deity begins from zero and traverses the entire path all along and eventually attains infinity. For, as we have seen, when two zeros merge, they become infinity. God, who, if it is eminently indispensable, must of necessity be the inherent and integral part of anything and everything. The need to be so is only explainable if it has a reason and purpose for being so. And the reason and purpose the natural creator has is its own self-seeking and self-desiring need to know why it does what it does. That is, why is it in its nature to create and self-perpetuate and thus self-fulfill? If this is not the case, then there seems no reason for it to be omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. Also, what would be the need for all the creativity and the inherent desire of the created, that is man himself, to seek his own purpose? Just reflect on this and observe man's own quest, for he questions and seeks the meaning in things around and his own being. The nature that knows all must have known that if it remained only in the paradigm of the metaphysics, it would not itself evolve into anything and would eventually remain in oblivion. So it says kun, fayakun, Al-Quran 36:82. That is, be, and it becomes. This command brought forth all action and creativity and its own transformation, resulting the beginning of the change of its own paradigm from the meta or unconscious or dormant to the state of physics or the beginning of consciousness or the material, that is, from metaphysical to the physical stage of its own existence. This resulted in both the establishing of the laws of cause and effect, and as a consequence, its own change of state from the unconscious mode to the becoming of a consciously conscious existence. The next stage in the cycle is the retransference into the tranquil stage of becoming a fully conscious being, fully appreciating and understanding its own nature as to why it does what it does. In other words, it creates and why it creates. Seeing it another way, the act of creation is the transforming of the potential energy content to the dynamic energy phase by the deity of its own self. Hence, dynamism is the basis of the process of evolution, whereas station or stasis is stagnation. Thus, to consciously evolve, one has to knowingly affect change in oneself, or act or become dynamic from a state of stasis. This is the way to self-fulfillment of both the created and the creator itself. If the deity does not follow this line of reasoning, would it not then, as mentioned earlier, be a mere egotistic puppeteer? Before making our final conclusions, it is worth looking at one interesting aspect of the phenomena of one of many of nature's creation, time. Again, see what Ghalib says. Nafas mauj muhite bekhudi hai, taghaful hai sakhi ka gila kya. Time is a wave in the depth of oblivion. Why then complain of the sakhi's lack of attention? Here Ghalib gives an original concept of time. He says, time seems to be just a disturbance in the calm sea of everlasting tranquility. A temporary birth of consciousness in the void of serene unconscious oblivion. This idea is far ahead of its own time, and its meaning and beauty is enhanced if seen in the light of the theory of relativity, which was propounded by Einstein about 100 years later. Delving a little further on the thought, time seems to have started at the moment the deity wished to seek itself in a conscious manner. That is, at the instant it thought of becoming a consciously conscious being, waking up from dormancy to enlightenment, or becoming conscious of its own beauty and creative ability, and then being desirous to fathom the reason why it has this attribute and to show it to the world. That is, in the end, the world which is nothing but its own infinitesimal extension. In the second stanza, Ghalib says, does it really matter if the Sakhi, the beautiful tavern hostess, also signifying the dispenser of the elixir of life, forgot to pass a round of drinks? In other words, we should not complain if the Creator turns its attention momentarily from our needs and seems to be disinterested in, for perhaps it has other more pressing preoccupations, the search for itself. Hence, the conclusion is that the natural deity is an integral part of all things and everything. It is an internal controller, both affecting and being affected by the change within the system, because it is itself the system, maker of, yet subservient to its own dictates. It is thus this uniqueness or singularity of the natural system and the whole concept of Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum, Al-Quran 2:255, that is, the living, eternal, self-subsisting, ever-sustaining nature of the natural deity. This aspect keeps man guessing and wondering as to the nature of the nature itself. It would only be fair to say that God's alone is the perfect system, and systematic perfection leads to godliness. Just think and reflect.